Hi guys, it's me, ChazzaHDF, and welcome to another episode of the podcast, episode 39, where today we are going to be previewing the 2019 French Grand Prix after the very, of course, controversial events of the last Grand Prix in Canada. And also, later on in the stream, we'll be looking at something else in the world of Formula One that is very interesting. But yeah, great to have you guys here after last weekend. And all the, great success for the channel, and also the massive controversy that happened, of course, between Vettel and Hamilton. Great to have all of you here, no matter where in the world. Hopefully having a very good Saturday, and in general, hopefully you are having a very good weekend. By the way, apologies for the stream not starting absolutely on time. We've only started, 10 minutes later, so it's not a big deal, but basically, my computer was going a bit slow, so there you go. Happens quite a lot, so it's not that big of a surprise for me. But now, let me now bring in Nib for the podcast, as always, of course. And Nib, how are you doing, mate? And how are you looking forward to next week's race, especially after what was a great previous race in Canada?
Well, certainly, especially after Canada, certainly looking forward to the French Grand Prix. Paul Ricard, we didn't expect it to be a fantastic race. We thought, oh yeah, it's going to be boring. There's no places to overtake, but the race last year was pretty good. And with the cars being able to follow a little bit better, I expect it's going to be an even better race than last year at Paul Ricard. So I'm certainly looking forward to the French Grand Prix quite a bit, and especially after the last Grand Prix in Canada, which was brilliant.
Yeah, it absolutely was, and I am hopeful for this French Grand Prix. I think we will get not a great race, but it will be a good one. I think we'll have plenty of racing in the midfield, maybe a couple of overtakes in the top, 3 or 4 positions. But I think we are in for a good Grand Prix next week in Paul Ricard. But now, let's, of course, start off with Mercedes, who took that controversial win in Canada. Mercedes, they continue, despite not having a very quick car in Canada, they still continued their 100% win record in 2019, which, of course, for them, they are very happy with. And I think coming to this Grand Prix, it's going to be, compared to, say, earlier races, compared to Canada, it's going to be back to business for this team. I think they will be locking out the front row of the grid. I think they are going to have clearly the best car. It won't be by an absolute mile, but they will definitely have the best car out there. I don't think a team like Ferrari can compete around this track, because it's just not that type of track where Ferrari can compete. And Red Bull, despite having a good aero package, they don't have enough of what you need, I think, at this track to be successful. And I think Mercedes will end up clearly fastest of all in France. But I just want to also talk about something, and I'll get Nib's thoughts on this in a moment. Toto Wolff, I found this hilarious. Toto Wolff came out after the Canadian Grand Prix, and he came out to the Canadian Grand Prix and said that the race in Canada was one of the most difficult races that he's ever faced. That is absolute rubbish. It's absolute rubbish. It really is, because let's go through it. So you've got the Rosberg-Hamilton crashes, which were, more difficult than that. Like, what was it? Spain 2016, Spa 2014, Hungary 2014, even though they didn't quite make contact. Other races like USA 2015, they've had more difficult races than that. And I'm not sure Toto is in the best position in the world to talk about difficult races, considering his entire time as a team principal in F1. He has won both the drivers and constructors. Well, he hasn't won the drivers, but, he's won every single title in F1 ever since he became a team principal. So I don't think Toto is, let's say, in the best position in the world to talk about difficulty as a team principal and bad or, hard weekends. And also, Austria last year was even worse than this, where they had a double retirement after leading 1 and 2 in the Grand Prix. So I don't know what he's on about, honestly. But yeah, Nib, for Mercedes in France, they're most likely going to be fastest. But yeah, with Toto's comments, do you honestly think that he's correct? Do you think Mercedes had one of the most difficult weekends in Canada? I don't think they did.
Well, we'll get on to how I think Mercedes will get to go at Canada next weekend. We've seen last year, especially last year, they're so good at this track. It suits them. But however, I think they will be challenged quite a bit. I think more than what people think. Ferrari showed in Canada that they can compete. And I think that Ferrari will compete once again in France, but not quite as close. I still think Mercedes will have the best car, and I think Mercedes showed in race pace they have the best car, and that is a lot to do with something that Mercedes are fantastic at, and that is their fuel economy. Ferrari during the race were struggling with their fuel, and they had to save fuel. But whereas Mercedes, their more economical engine worked an absolute treat for them. But now, now going on to our good old mate Toto Wolff, we're going to bang the desk. Toto, I don't know what he's on about, to be honest. Mercedes had a good weekend, of course. Valtteri Bottas had an extremely poor weekend. Made so many mistakes in qualifying, and then his race was absolutely awful, and he had to battle for quite a few laps to get past even Daniel Ricciardo. So, yeah, Bottas an awful weekend. I think Toto means that it's a bit of a stressful weekend, not the hardest. Of course, he complained about what Sebastian did to Hamilton, but that's just part of the sport. You can't blame Toto for complaining about that. And then ultimately, Sebastian getting the penalty. There was issues with the Mercedes engine. Hamilton had a whole heap of issues with his hydraulics built before the race. So I kind of understand where Toto is coming from this. Yeah, I can't really blame Toto for saying it was like the most stressful weekend of his F1 career. Of course, he was basically in charge of Williams in 2012, and then since that, it's been all Mercedes, where it's been fairly pretty smooth sailing. But I suppose if you look at the whole weekend in general, the Hamilton issues, Bottas not doing well, not getting optimum points for like the first time this year, the second time this year, sorry, of course, at Monaco they didn't, but I suppose from that standpoint, Toto might have had a little bit of a stress, yeah.
From that point of view, I get it, because again, Hamilton had the hydraulic issue, which he might not have even started the Grand Prix because of. Yes, Bottas had his errors and he didn't look that great, honestly. Valtteri, say, from qualifying 3 on, he really did not look good in that car. And then, of course, the race, it was controversial. It was hard for them to compete with Vettel in the Ferrari, but there's been a lot more, say, pressure or, say, scrutiny from the media after a race than there was in Canada, I think, because, again, when Hamilton and Rosberg crashed, Toto Wolff was really put under pressure because of those crashes and maybe put under pressure to stop them from racing or stuff like that. So I don't quite agree it was one of the hardest. Maybe it was a very stressful one, but I don't think it was the worst or most stressful he's ever had. No way at all. But now let's go on to Ferrari, who, of course, in Canada finished in P2 and P3. Still, for me, Sebastian Vettel is the rightful winner of the Canadian Grand Prix. I don't think he deserved to get the penalty. And also with Ferrari have pulled their appeal attempt against the FIA, but they have said that they're reviewing their right to appeal. So kind of confusing what's going on right now, but Ferrari, they can't really do anything in terms of that appeal right now, because I don't think the penalty can be rescinded, because I think it was a 5-second penalty because of the fact that you can take that penalty at a pit stop. I think that's why you can't get that penalty removed. So it's kind of pointless. And to be honest, this might sound a bit hypocritical, considering that I do think Vettel was the rightful winner. But for me, I would rather Lewis Hamilton now keep the win. Because if Vettel, say if he did then get the win after an appeal, if they could overturn the result, it would make it even more of a farce, because Formula One races should not be decided in a Paris courtroom. They should be decided at the track on the day. Even if there's a penalty after the fact later on in the day after the race is finished, it should still be decided on the Sunday of a Grand Prix, not 3 or 4 weeks later again in a Paris courtroom. So honestly, at this point, I'd rather Hamilton keep the win, because it's just going to make it even more of a farce. It's going to create even more, say, bad blood really in the community. So I hope they don't go forth with an appeal, because they should honestly at this point just leave it and focus on the next Grand Prix, because I think it's best for all parties to really just move on from the Canadian Grand Prix. But when it comes to this Grand Prix, the French Grand Prix next weekend, Ferrari, I think, will have, say in qualifying, the second best car, I think quite clearly. They won't be miles off Mercedes, but I think they will be, say, I don't know, 3.5 to 4 tenths of a second behind, something like that. I don't think Ferrari, again, have enough of a car in the first and third sectors of the track to really be competitive enough with Mercedes. And in the race, I think they will have a real race on their hands to get a podium, because I think Max Verstappen, like he was last year, will be very competitive in the race in the Red Bull. And I think the Red Bull on race day in France will be a lot more competitive. But for Ferrari, it's kind of going to go back to how it was, say, in China, Baku. They won't be miles off Mercedes, but they're not going to have a quick enough car to really compete with them for pole position, or I think the race win. Nib, for Ferrari, do you think they can seriously challenge Mercedes for pole or the win, or do you think they can win the race? And also, with the Ferrari appeal, do you think, like me, that F1 should just move on from the incident? And honestly, if it was overturned, it would just make it more of a farce, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, let's start off with last weekend. I absolutely 1,000,000,000% agree with you. If the decision of the penalty was overturned, it would be a farce. So I think we just need to get past Canada. You know, we obviously disagree with what came about the decision, but we need to move on. We need to look to Canada now. Oh, sorry, not to Canada, past Canada now, and onto Paul Ricard. And I know that Paul Ricard, I think Ferrari have a new front wing, still the same design of the more favored towards the outwash design, but so a new front wing for Ferrari, but I still don't think it will be enough for them to be there with Mercedes. Obviously, Sebastian did a fantastic lap at Canada, and we know he's very good at Canada. But we've seen at at France, that Mercedes are just the better team. Their car suits the track more. They're better in the faster corners. They're better in the medium speed corners, and there isn't many slow corners, and that's where Mercedes have the biggest advantage. Of course, there are lots of straight lines, which Ferrari are very good at, especially leading up to the chicane and after the chicane, and then the right hander. So that's where certainly with Ferrari will have a big advantage, I think. I really don't know. I think Ferrari could challenge Mercedes at Paul Ricard. Certainly last year, because they had a big disadvantage in the fast corners age of last season. But I think at Paul Ricard this year that they really could challenge Mercedes, and I wouldn't be surprised if Leclerc or Vettel, because Leclerc was very good here at France last year, and so was Vettel. But I think Ferrari will be pretty close to Mercedes next weekend, if I'm going to be perfectly honest. I think it will be a tenth or so in between it. in qualifying, but then in the race, Mercedes don't have to save as much fuel. They just have a better car on their tires because they've got the of course the new tires. The new tires favour Mercedes. Of course, it's the tires which were used at France, Silverstone, and Spain last year. Of course, we're using that tyre, and Mercedes are very good on that tyre. And I think in the race, it's a no contest for Mercedes, really. So I think that Ferrari will be pretty close in qualifying, but if they don't have a car in front, it's pretty much curtains for Ferrari for next weekend at Paul Ricard.
Yeah, I think if Ferrari, as you say, are going to be that close, I think the only way Ferrari can win in France is if they do go out there and get pole position like they did in Canada. I don't think they will. I think they'll be, again, not that far off, but I don't think at the end of the day they will be close enough to get pole. But hopefully they are, because as we saw in Canada, and also we saw this in Bahrain, when two teams are fighting for the win, it makes things more exciting. It absolutely does. So hopefully Ferrari are just as competitive in France. Now, and let me just quickly move on from that picture there of Vettel and Hamilton. And now let me go on to Red Bull. So, Red Bull. Canada was not really that great. I don't think their pace was that much of a surprise because we knew they wouldn't be as quick as Ferrari and Mercedes. I thought they would be a bit closer in terms of speed than they were. But they did, still have the third fastest car, I think, with Max Verstappen finishing P5 and Gasly finished, embarrassingly for me, down in P8. And yeah, Red Bull, again, it wasn't in terms of pace, it wasn't terrible, but in terms of the results of qualifying in the race, it definitely could have been a whole lot better. And now coming to the French Grand Prix, I think this track does suit the Red Bull car better, so I think they'll be closer to, say, pole position. Not that they'll be anywhere really close anyway, but they'll be closer than they were in Canada, and they'll have more of a chance of getting onto the podium in the Grand Prix than they did in Canada, because I think the Red Bull car, especially with Max Verstappen, if Ferrari are not that competitive compared to Mercedes, I think Verstappen, really could get in there and seriously compete with Vettel and Leclerc, because as Nib mentioned a few minutes ago, Ferrari are not that great on race pace, or they're not that great on their tyres. Red Bull are very good on race pace and are good on their tyres. And tyre wear, by the way, is important at this track because you have a lot of, long corners, plenty of fast corners that really do take a lot of life out of the tyres. So tyre wear will be very important. And I think Red Bull, because of that fact, that will also bring Red Bull a bit closer to teams like Ferrari and maybe Mercedes in the on race day, rather, because of that fact. I think Verstappen will definitely be right up there in the top 3 or 4. Pierre Gasly, of course, it's his home race, but I don't think he will be really competing in the top 5. I think he will probably be how he was, say, at the Spanish Grand Prix, say P6, and then just cruise around, say, halfway in between the midfield and the top 5. As I said in my video on Thursday, which, by the way, if you haven't seen, there's a link in the description to that video. I don't think Pierre Gasly is good enough for Red Bull, and I do think he should be dropped. By the way, in that video, I just want to clarify that when I say should be dropped, I don't necessarily mean he should be dropped right now, but say by the end of the season, he should be dropped. But I think, again, he should be dropped from Red Bull, and he should not be at that team, definitely for 2020, because he's just not good enough. I understand not being as quick as Max Verstappen, but you should still be within, I think, a couple tenths of a second. Say, at worst, you should be a quarter of a second slower than Max, like Daniel was at times. So I think Gasly, at the end of the day, just isn't good enough for Red Bull Racing. But when it comes to this Grand Prix, again, I think Red Bull will be a bit more competitive. Not massively competitive, but a bit more than they were in Canada. Nib, for Red Bull, do you think they will be more competitive? And also for Pierre Gasly, what are your thoughts on what I've had to say about him? Do you think he should be dropped? And do you think that his performance in Canada, like I thought, was for me, quite frankly, embarrassing? What do you think?
Well, if Red Bull is going to qualify where they should be in 5th and 6th, of course, they weren't able to qualify there last week. Of course, Kevin Magnussen's crash in Q2 ruined Max's attempt to get into Q3, and then in Q3, he would have probably qualified in 5th. So if everything is a bit more smooth sailing for Red Bull in qualifying next weekend in Paul Ricard, I think that Max will be quite comfortably able to potentially get a podium. You know, I don't think in qualifying trim that they will be quite as quick as Ferrari or anywhere near as Ferrari. I think they'll be about 6 to 7 tenths off in quali. But in race pace, of course, Red Bull are always very, very quick and very strong. So Max, if he's able to qualify 5th, I think he'll have a very strong race. Do I think he'll get on the podium? No, I don't. Don't think he has a quite strong enough car to do that. You know, last year at Paul Ricard, the Red Bull completely different car was the best car on the grid, but at the moment they're still struggling with a couple of things, especially rear downforce. Mercedes currently have the best car in terms of aero and chassis at the moment. For Red Bull don't, and they did last year. So I think that will be the issue. And now on to Pierre Gasly. Of course, he was quite frankly awful last weekend at Canada. Couldn't get past Lance Stroll for quite a few laps, and then he finished behind both Renaults. And as a Red Bull driver, that's frankly not quite acceptable. And you know, I've been defending Pierre, saying he's getting better and better every race weekend, which had been true. But at the Canadian Grand Prix in Montreal, it was quite a big step back for Pierre. You know, finishing behind both Ricciardo and Hulkenberg in Renaults. That's quite not good enough. You know, I'm not going to say that he needs to go right now. That's for sure. I'm not one for drivers to be called to getting the sack. I think, but if he continues in this sort of way of form, I don't see him staying at Red Bull for next season. So I think Pierre really has to lift up his game. Of course, it is his home Grand Prix, the French Grand Prix, and he has to deliver, does Pierre Gasly. He has to deliver a big, big performance. Otherwise, his seat really is in trouble.
Yeah, he does. And the thing I was really disappointed with in Canada was that, as you said, and it is true, if you look at Baku, Spain and Monaco, he was improving compared to his teammate and compared to, say, the top 5, Bottas, Hamilton, Verstappen, Vettel, Leclerc. But then in Canada, he completely threw away all of that good work by getting out-qualified by Ricciardo. Yes, he out-qualified Bottas, but Bottas is just as guilty as Gasly as being out-qualified by Ricciardo. And then to fail to, pass Ricciardo in the first stint, then get overcut by Hulkenberg, but also what really was, say, the final nail in the coffin for me when it comes to Gasly is that he got up to the back of Lance Stroll after Ricciardo passed him. He was within DRS for, I think, 3 or 4 laps, and then he dropped back massively for the next, 15, 20 laps, and Stroll was pulling away quite handsomely from him. And I think the gap when Stroll pitted finally was like 4.5 seconds. And to be honest, if Lance Stroll could, improve his qualifying, I think Stroll would have beat Gasly in the race because his race pace was way better than Gasly's race pace. So in Canada, it was just, for me, the final straw. It was so poor. So poor. But I also just want to quickly touch on a subject about Max Verstappen. Now, Helmut Marko has come out and said that that Verstappen, or how they, you know, ruined Verstappen's weekend cannot happen again, because that will result possibly in Max leaving Red Bull. Now, I think this is a bit of an overreaction from Red Bull, to be honest, because, you know, it's one mistake that they made. They made the same mistake with Pierre Gasly in Australia, but, you know, it's only just one error. I don't think Verstappen is going to be looking to leave just because he got his qualifying absolutely destroyed by Red Bull. I don't think that is the case. So I think there's a massive overreaction when it comes to that. Yes, it's disappointing that Max got knocked out in P11. But, you know, sometimes teams and drivers make those errors. But I will say Red Bull, they need to, in the same way Ferrari need to improve their strategy when it comes to certain areas. I think Red Bull also need to as well, because that's, you know, 2 times that they've been knocked out for not, you know, going out there and getting the job done early on to get into the next part of qualifying. In Australia with Gasly and in Canada with Verstappen. But also, if you go back and watch qualifying in Canada, you will see that Pierre Gasly was only a 1/10.5 from being knocked out in Q1 because he wasn't sent out at the end of the session. So Red Bull do need to keep more of an eye on that and improve in that area, again in the same way Ferrari do. But guys, that is the top teams, and before we go on to the midfield, we're now going to come to you guys in the live chat and see what you guys think when it comes to Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull. And then, of course, we will move on to the midfield. But I just want to say, guys, don't forget to subscribe for more content like this, as we do podcast episodes right in between, you know, Grand Prix happening during 2019. So don't forget to subscribe for more podcast episodes. Bottom right of the screen, you can subscribe right there, or go to my homepage, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell. And also, don't forget to hit this video with a like. But I'm going to quickly take a drink, and then we'll get to reading some of your comments, and then we'll get into the midfield. A midfield that I think will be, again, very competitive, like it has been in 2019. They are going to be very competitive, I think, in France. Right. Let's see what you guys have to say when it comes to these teams. Annette says, in regards to the appeal, my understanding about the only way they could appeal is if they had information that the stewards did not have access to. They can't appeal if they don't like the results. Yeah, well, there's no more evidence that they can provide. The evidence is already out there, and I'm pretty sure the stewards did look at the evidence and you know, make their decision based on all the camera angles they had. So Ferrari, they can't win. They can't win. So yeah. Right, let me find some more comments here. This is an interesting one from Thomas Hill, who asks, Chazza, do you think reprofiling of the pit lane entry is a good idea? Obviously, last year put the Mercedes mechanics in danger if a car came in too hot. Also, the pit lane exit needs to be reprofiled as well, because that can be dangerous depending on the type of situation that does occur. Yeah, they probably should, but what can they do? It's an old racetrack, and it's going to take a bit of time to, you know, come up with a new, you know, type of pit lane with a new entry and a new exit. I think with the entry, they can definitely find a new entry, because, I mean, look at the amount of runoff they have at Paul Ricard. In the lead up to the final couple corners, I'm sure they can find a way of, you know, cutting out a bit where they can just put a little lane that goes straight to the pit lane. But for the pit exit, it's going to be difficult, because of what they're going to have to do if they're going to reprofile the pit exit, unless they already have. I'm not sure they have. We'll have to see in France in a week's time, but they'll have to completely redesign the first corner, because it completely relies upon that pit exit. The pit exit can't really be moved because of the way the first corner is and stuff like that. So it should be, but again, it's a difficult thing for them to be able to do. Right, let me find a few more comments. Sebastian says, I reckon it'll be close between Ferrari and Mercedes. First sector, Mercedes will be quickest. Middle sector, Ferrari will be quicker because of the two straights. And then final sector, it will be Merc. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what it will be in France. Hello to Crystal Racing. Great to see you, mate. Let me find... Mr. Random Guy saying you said 4/10. That's quite a large gap. No, not really. Not really. I think a big gap is probably half a second, but say 3.5 to 4/10 is not. It's not massive. It's not massive. I don't think.
2/10 is a massive gap in Formula One.
I don't think 2/10 is a massive gap. I think 3.5 to 4. Yeah, you could definitely put a good argument for it being big, but I don't think 2.5 is big.
Might I just say on the pit entry, I do agree it's really dangerous. The pit entry does certainly need to be looked at, but I don't think they are changing the pit entry or exit, and of course the exit. It rejoins on the actual racing line for turn 1, so they'd have to spend quite a lot of money to reprofile the pit exit. You know, to have to go underneath the track or something to come back out of turn 2 into turn 3. So, you know, I don't think that the pit exit can really be improved on the way it is at the moment.
Mr. Random Guy, by the way, just saying that they have apparently changed the entry. We'll see in a week's time.
Let's have a look.
Yeah, I've heard that the drivers have complained about it, but I haven't actually seen that it has actually been changed or anything. Let me find a couple more comments, and then we will move on to the rest of the field. Will F1 says, according to Autosport and other motorsport websites, Haas have had a bit of a disastrous season so far. Yes, they have. And by the way, we'll get on to Haas later on because I got plenty to say about Haas, and also Alfa Romeo. Got plenty to say about them. Right, let me find... Oh, go on.
I'm just reading an article from Motorsport saying that motorsport.com can confirm that the pit entry which was previously accessed via the main straight, the final corner, and then you take the right into the pit, will be moved from the 2019 edition of the revived French GP. The entry will now be situated between turns 14 and 15, the unwinding left-right sequence that makes up the final 2 corners of the track. So there you go. It won't be at on the main straight now after the final corner. It will be where that where the left-hander is, and then before the right-hander of the final corner. So that's certainly a lot better and a lot safer than what it was compared to last year.
Absolutely, that is a good place to put it. Right, let me find one final comment, then we'll get into the midfield. Robert McPhee says, Red Bull still think their car is as fast as last year over midfield, hence why they keep getting caught out. I think, yeah, that probably is the case. When Red Bull push as hard as they can on everything, fuel, engine, mode, tyres, they are clearly faster than the midfield. But when they try and, you know, qualify on the harder tyre, they've got to realise that because of the midfield being definitely closer to teams like Red Bull and Ferrari this season than they were last season, they cannot take that risk as much as they could do in 2018. 2018, the top 3 teams could do whatever they want in terms of what tyres they started on. I mean, they could have started on the hardest possible compound if they wanted to, because that's the amount of speed they had. But this year, that's just not possible. And also, when you come to a track where the lap time is small, and, you know, say if it's in the 1 minute, I don't know, 10s, 11s, or even quicker than that, say if it's Austria, the difference between the cars is not as big as it normally would be at, say, the circuit to Catalonia or Spa or Singapore. So you can't take that risk because the cars are all going to be closer because of the smaller, lap. So I think Red Bull need to realise that and revise their strategy a bit. But now we'll move on to the midfield. First off is Renault, who had a great Canadian Grand Prix, P6 and P7 for Ricciardo and Hülkenberg. They are now into P5 in the Constructors, and I believe they are only 2 points away from McLaren. So looking good for Renault again. And to be honest, how they performed in Canada is how they were expected to perform in 2019. Not be quicker than Red Bull, because I don't think, honestly, they were quicker than Red Bull. I think it's because of how bad Gasly was, which is why they beat one of the Red Bulls. But be, very clearly at the front of the midfield, which they were. They were miles ahead of McLaren, Racing Point, Toro Rosso, other teams like that, especially Haas and Alpha. They need to be like that on a more consistent basis. And I think if their upgrades for the French Grand Prix work, which, by the way, Renault do have quite a few new parts coming for this Grand Prix and Paul Ricard, which is certainly going to be interesting to see how they get on with that. If they do work, then I don't think Renault, after Canada, where they really showed what they can do when they're, performing at their best, I don't think they really have that many excuses anymore. They've got to start performing more like that, because if they do, on a consistent basis, they will easily get P4 on the Constructors. It won't even be close. But as we've seen with Renault, and as we saw, for example, in Shanghai, even where they were great there, it hasn't been a consistent thing this season. Most of the season, they haven't quite had good enough results. So hopefully, at their home Grand Prix, they can now start to really get into P4 on the Constructors first of all, and then march away from the other midfield teams. For Renault, Nib, do you think those new parts are going to work for them? And do you think that possibly what we saw in Canada, maybe not as much as what we saw in Canada, but do you think in terms of their gap to the midfield, do you think that's what we should be seeing more so from Renault?
Well, I think it's fair to say that I don't think Renault will be qualifying in fourth place uh, if everything goes to normal for the French Grand Prix. But Renault over the past few races, Monaco and of course the last race, have looked really good. They've looked the strongest team in the midfield. They're finally starting to get everything together, and they've got quite considerable and substantial upgrades, as the team has been saying, for the next Grand Prix. They were supposed to have these early in the season, but there was some issues at the factory. So these upgrades are now coming for the French Grand Prix, of course, their home Grand Prix. And after Canada, of course, you're only as good as your last race, as some would say. So I think Renault really are going to be super strong at their home Grand Prix. I don't think they'll be too far. Pardon me. So I don't think they'll be quite there with say Max, but I think with Gasly, they're going to have another real fight with Pierre Gasly for sixth place in qualifying, which is absolutely mental for Renault. And I think they're very happy with how the last race went. Of course, they lost 2 positions in the Grand Prix with Daniel Ricciardo. He lost, obviously, position to Max Verstappen and Valtteri Bottas, as you honestly quite expect him to be. But Nico Hülkenberg had a terrific first stint, that he lasted so much longer on those soft tyres than anyone expected. So massive kudos to Nico Hülkenberg. And then, of course, Ricciardo had a brilliant defensive battle with Valtteri Bottas, which ultimately killed his tyres. And then Hülkenberg caught him. And then, of course, Renault ordered Hülkenberg to stay behind Ricciardo in the end. But I think Renault at their home Grand Prix in France, I think they really will be strong. I think they'll clearly be the fourth fastest team. They seem to get these tyres in the right window, which some teams have been struggling with, mainly Haas, which is who I'm talking about. And then if you look at McLaren, they don't quite have the downforce, which is quite required to be at the top of the midfield in this sport at the moment, and Renault do. So I think quite clearly and quite very strongly, Renault will be the fourth fastest team at Paul Ricard.
When it comes to Renault, at Paul Ricard, I'm not sure where they'll be, honestly. I think they are definitely going to be in that top 10. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure where they will definitely be, because I do expect a couple other teams to, say, improve compared to their previous performances. For example, I think Haas will be better at this track than they were in Canada. I think this track does suit the Haas car more than Canada does. I think Renault, based on, you know, the point that they do have new upgrades and that this track does suit their car, it should be them at the front of the midfield, but I'm not too sure yet if they will be. I'm kind of waiting to see how they get on in practice to see, you know, how good they are. But hopefully they can be that good, because, well, quite frankly, for Renault's progress and for Formula One, we do need another top team right up there. But now let's go on to McLaren. McLaren, in terms of the result, had a disappointing Canadian Grand Prix. I think in terms of pace, it was actually good, but it didn't go their way. It did not go their way, the Canadian Grand Prix. Lando Norris, of course, having that very weird failure of his suspension. Very unfortunate, I think, there for McLaren, because I think if Norris had finished the race, I think Norris would have scored points for McLaren, because his pace was actually quite good. And I think Norris probably would have finished, say, P9 or even P10 in the Grand Prix. But yeah, unfortunate then. And Sainz, of course, fell victim to having pitted so early on for tyres. He fell victim to Stroll and Kvyat. So, kind of unfortunate for McLaren, honestly, in Canada. And I think definitely they didn't get the result that they should have got from that Grand Prix. Now, coming to this race, I think they won't be as strong as they were in Canada. In Canada, they were a very strong outfit in the midfield. I don't think they will be as strong, but I do think they will get a points finish with one of their cars. Probably Carlos Sainz in, I don't know, P8 or 9, something like that. I think McLaren will get in the points. I don't think they'll necessarily be a top 10 runner in qualifying, but in the race, I think they will definitely get a points finish, and I think McLaren will still be competing nicely and strongly up there with other teams in the midfield like Renault and Haas, and even maybe Racing Point if they get their act together. Nib, for McLaren, do you think they're going to be good in France, or do you think they're going to drop back compared to Canada, where you have to say, despite not being as quick as Renault, they were still pretty good?
Yeah, McLaren was still pretty solid in Canada. Of course, Norris had his brakes were on fire and melted the rear suspension apart. Absolutely crazy to think about it, in all honesty. But of course, Carlos Sainz, with a couple laps left, got overtaken for his points finish. So I think if they have a good weekend, that they will get some points. You know, I think McLaren has shown that they are a team that is very capable of getting points at any track so far this season, and I think they will do again in Paul Ricard. I think they're one of the quickest, if not the quickest, midfield team, although I do think they'll be behind Renault next weekend. But McLaren, we're seeing that in low drag circuits that they've been better, and at this track you need a little bit more downforce compared to Canada. So their pace at Canada was good, but I don't think teams that were quicker than them at Canada will be as good, say, Racing Point. I don't think they'll be as strong as what they were at the Canadian Grand Prix to what they are going to be at the French Grand Prix. So I think that McLaren will get some good solid points once again, but ultimately I think they'll be full behind Renault for fourth place in the Constructors' Championship.
Yeah, if Renault are as quick as you say they're going to be, then yeah, that is likely, because even if McLaren do finish in the points, they're most likely going to be starting from a position where they're going to be at a disadvantage compared to, you know, the front-running midfield team. So McLaren, I think, will have a good weekend. It won't be anything special, though. Now, let's get on to the two Ferrari customer teams, Alfa Romeo and Haas F1, because I need to really talk about both of these teams, and I think Nib will make his points very clear as well in a moment. But with Alfa and Haas, I think the Canadian Grand Prix basically showed us the reality of Alfa and Haas's 2019. Those two cannot go for fourth in the Constructors. I think their chances honestly are over. Not because they're too many points away, because they're not that many points away, but it's because of the way their cars are. For example, Alfa Romeo, let's go back to them. Their car is terrible at the moment, absolutely terrible. It has no rear downforce to speak of. If you go and watch Antonio Giovinazzi's spin in Canada, that's basically what it was. No rear downforce when he turned into the corner and completely spun the car around. The car looks not that fun to drive. It looks incredibly heavy around the corners. It is definitely, for me, the worst midfield car right now. Not massively the worst midfield car. I think Racing Point's car is still not that good, even though Stroll was great in the race in Canada. And I think the Racing Point car in the race was good in Canada. The Alfa Romeo does have very poor downforce. In a straight line, of course, they're very good. But when it comes to downforce, the car just looks so sluggish. It doesn't look like it has that much grip. And I think, honestly, Alfa, because of the last 3 races and the way they've gone and the way they've dropped back, I think Alfa, their chances of fourth in the Constructors are dead, because they don't have any real downforce. The front wing, as you can see, or not on this picture, but as we've seen this season, is the same design as the Ferrari, and that design is a horrible one, and that has resulted in Ferrari and Alfa Romeo not being as competitive as they could be. But more importantly, with the Alfa, the rear end of the car is so bad. It's so bad. And Alfa, for me, are completely out of it when it comes to fourth in the Constructors. Now, Haas, the reason they're out of it is not because their car doesn't have enough downforce or it lacks speed. It's because this team is so inconsistent. So inconsistent. You cannot tell what they're going to do at any weekend. They could be dominantly at the front of the midfield or right back there with Williams. You have no idea what they are going to do. The car is terrible on its tyres. No consistency whatsoever. The drivers don't even know what they're going to be in for every time they go into a session. That's how bad the consistency of the Haas car is in terms of the grip it offers at certain points of a weekend. It's that bad. And I think because of that, they're not going to finish P4 in the Constructors. You have to be consistent to finish in a good position in the Constructors' Championship, and Haas are not that. For example, this season McLaren have been consistently good. Haas are not in that position. They're not in that position where they are consistently good enough to be, like McLaren, P4 in the Constructors. So for me, Haas and Alfa are completely out of it. But also, Haas came out and said, or I think Gunther Steiner came out and said after Canada, that 2019, in his opinion, can't get any worse. Well, trust me, it can. Because, yes, Kevin Magnussen was beat by one of the Williamses, but just wait until possibly both of the Haases are in that, situation. I don't think it will happen. I think Magnussen had some kind of damage to his car, but I think, saying that 2019 can't get any worse, I think he's wrong there, because it definitely can. Haas don't have the worst midfield car, and trust me, they can absolutely go to that low. They can absolutely go to that low. But Nib, with Haas and Alfa, do you agree? Do you think they're out of it for fourth in the Constructors? And what do you think about both of their cars at the moment? Because for me, again, with Haas, way too inconsistent. And for Alfa, they don't really have any downforce.
Yeah, I straight up agree with you. Alfa Romeo, with the Ferrari engine, you think that they're the best. But the issue is, right, Ferrari are the only real benefits. They're the only really team that has the benefit of how good that Ferrari engine is. It really only works super duper well in the Ferrari car. It doesn't work as well in the Haas or the Alfa Romeo car. So that's why we see them struggling every single weekend, really. Haas have been the fourth quickest car a few times so far this season, but as you mentioned, they're just not consistent enough. Kevin Magnussen complained and said that this is the worst last week in the calendar in Canada. It's the worst experience I've ever had in a race car ever. And honestly, I think that's because after his mistake, the car wasn't built properly back together. There was some sort of issue. There has to be, because he was in the 121s, and even the Williams were like in the 18s. So they couldn't have been that slow. I think Magnussen's car wasn't built back 100,000% properly. I know they stayed up all night to try and fix his car. So I think they just had some issues fixing his car. But Alfa Romeo, I was so complimentary of them when they launched their car earlier in the year. I said they were my dark horse, but they've really shown me in the last few races that they've been, well, nothing but awful. Haas have been awful. I know that Gunter Steiner, of course, along with Helmut Marko and a couple of other teams, have complained severely about the tyres, but Haas, they just aren't on top of the tyres, and that has been their real main issue since they've ever come into the sport, really since 2016. Of course, they had a really good start in 2016 at Bahrain, and 2017 they had a good start, but they just couldn't maintain it. And then last year they had the fourth quickest car for most of the season, but they could never capitalize on how good they were. So once again, Haas just that yo-yo team in the midfield. You can never really truly get what you expect from them. But I must say, at Paul Ricard, the corners are more suited towards a faster corner car, and Haas have a very good car in the fast corners. So I wouldn't be surprised if Renault are there up towards the top of the midfield. They can't be worse than what they were at Canada. Of course, the Ferrari engine in the back isn't as good as the actual Ferrari engine in the Ferrari. So I think that at Paul Ricard they'll be pretty good, but just not simply as good as what many would expect them to be.
Yeah, I think they will be better, but again, Haas coming into this season would have aimed again for fourth in the constructors, but I'm afraid it's not possible. They need a consistent car, and they don't have it. And by the way, when it comes to Haas, they can't complain about the tyres this season, I'm afraid. They cannot, because last season they had not as bad of issues with the tyres that they do have this year, but they still had issues with tyres. They were still the worst team in the midfield for tyre wear last year, and they were also the worst team probably in the entire field for performing on the softest compound of tyre. So they can't complain about that. It's the way their car has been designed, I'm afraid. Their car has been designed to, I think, as you said, Nib, it's a very quick car in the fast corners, but I think because of that, they're taking a lot out of their tyres. And that's why, in the races, where of course you can't push 100% because the tyres will not allow it, they fall back. I think if the tyres were, say, like they were back in 2010, I think Haas would have a very, consistent car. But they don't, because the tyres, they don't allow you to be able to push every single lap to the absolute max of what you can do. But anyway, let's move on from those teams. Haas and Alfa really, really not looking good right now. One team that is, though, is Toro Rosso. Toro Rosso, again, having a good result in Canada. P10 with Danny Kvyat. Another good race for him. That's 3. To be honest, that's 4 good races in a row for him. I think Baku was a good race for him. I know he, qualified P6 and dropped back a bit before he got reversed into by Ricciardo. But I thought in Baku he was still good, and I think...
We didn't talk about that. That incident in Baku never happened.
Let's just forget about it. But with Kvyat, I think even in Baku, even though he did drop back, and I think he was P10 at the time of that that certain incident. I think he was still good, and I think the Toro Rosso car was really letting him down on the race day in Baku. In Spain, he was good. I think in Spain, he probably could and should have finished at the front of the midfield ahead of Kevin Magnussen, because he was actually ahead of Magnussen before the safety car came out. In Monaco, he was great, P7, and in Canada, put a great move on Sainz to get a point. So Kvyat right now looking very good. Alexander Albon, not looking as good, but is still performing well enough, and I think is still impressing people. By the way, I'd just like to point out to the people that thought he was going to be the worst driver on the grid, well, you're sadly mistaken, because he's definitely not the worst driver on the grid. No chance is he the worst on the grid. There's a lot worse than him. But yeah, Toro Rosso, their driver's looking good, their car is looking good, and I think, like McLaren, and I think you mentioned this with McLaren earlier, Nib, that the Toro Rosso, like the McLaren, it can really finish in the points at any track. It doesn't really matter what track it is. They're going to finish in the points at whatever track comes up on the calendar. And I think in Paul Ricard, I think they will finish in the points. I think it'll probably be at best P9. I don't think they'll be getting P7 or P8. I think that's a bit too much for that car. But P9 and P10 is really where I think they are going to be. And I wouldn't be shocked if they even got a car into the top 10 in qualifying. The Toro Rosso really looking good right now. And I have to say, this has been the best start to a season and the best Toro Rosso car probably since 2016, maybe even earlier than that. It's a really good car this year. Very, very good car, and it's great to see Toro Rosso looking better than I thought they would be for this season. Nib, yeah, for Toro Rosso, as I said and mentioned your point about McLaren, Toro Rosso, they do have a good enough car to score points anyway, anywhere rather. And I think it's probably going to be the same case in France, isn't it?
I absolutely agree. They are the complete and utter opposite of what Haas are at the moment. Haas so inconsistent, whereas Toro Rosso are extremely consistent. You know, they've scored points at many races so far this season, and they have excellent tyre wear. You know, Danny Kvyat did a fantastic job. You know, they obviously and quite clearly weren't one of the quickest cars at the Canadian Grand Prix in the midfield. They weren't. They're probably 7th or 8th quickest car there that weekend. But once again, they score points. It's just what Toro Rosso are doing so far this season. They have the drivers who are capable to go and score those points. And that's just what they do. And I think France is going to be a bit of a better track for them than what the Montreal circuit was for them. So I really do think that at Paul Ricard, once again, the Toro Rosso will score a point. I don't know who will be. Obviously, Kvyat and Albon, both two drivers. I don't know who will score the points, but I think one of them will at least score points. And once again, as you just mentioned, I don't think it'll be higher than 9th, but they just have this knack at the moment to be able to get points, and I think they'll do it again.
And by the way, you mentioned with how they are on race day and stuff like that, and I noticed this rather during testing when I went to the final 4 days, that the Toro Rosso didn't catch your eye, but when they were obviously doing their race simulations, it looked like a very comfortable car to drive. Not amazingly quick in the corners, not stunning, but it looked very comfortable to drive and very consistent compared to other cars in the midfield, like a Haas or other cars like an Alfa Romeo. It looked like it could be driven very consistently for an entire race distance, and you can clearly see that in 2019, that on a race day, because of that, they're able to move up and get into a points-paying position. But now, let's go on to the final midfield team, Racing Point. Canada, in terms of pace, wasn't as good, I think, as Racing Point were hoping for. I know Stroll finished 9th, but I think that is honestly, this might be a bit weird for me to say, that's honestly more so to do with Lance Stroll's driving as to why Racing Point got a point.
Just hear?
Yeah, you did hear me praising Lance Stroll. I don't think the Racing Point, though, say when it came to qualifying, was good enough compared to where the team expected it to be. And because of that, I think in France, Racing Point will most likely be between, say, P14 and P18. I don't think they're going to have a car that can really get close to the top 10 in qualifying. On race day, it is going to come down to the drivers and whether they can be super consistent on their tyres and whether the car can, you know, have good race pace and not destroy its tyres as well. So I think really for Racing Point, it's all about the race. It really is all about the race, and it's really been the case this season for this team. It's all about the Grand Prix, because in qualifying, Racing Point, except for Baku, have never really been that good. They've always been kind of meh when it comes to qualifying, and then on race day, they are one of the best teams in the midfield. And yet, finally for Racing Point, Nib, what do you think they'll do in France?
Well, we all know that Lance Stroll will get knocked out in Q1, but then he will have a fantastic start and probably get into a very good position once again, as we've seen at the Canadian Grand Prix. And it's not the first time that he's done a long first stint and got himself into the points. We've seen it at Australia, and once again, he did a fantastic job at Canada. And yeah, Perez will out qualify him in France, but in the race, Stroll will get a better start, probably find himself ahead of Perez, and then Stroll will probably have a stronger race. It just seems to be what is happening at the moment at Racing Point. So, Stroll, oh, he's frustrating. He has such good race starts. He is like the next level of Fernando Alonso at race starts. For those who have been following F1 for quite some time, we all know how good Fernando Alonso is and was at race starts. If only not Lando Norris. Why am I saying Lando Norris? Lance Stroll could get himself out of Q1 and into a solid position in Q2, he could find himself in the points already after the first lap, but he just isn't capable of doing it at the moment, and he needs to have a better qualifying. And I can't remember how many races he's had now where he's been knocked out in Q1. He needs to change that. He really does, because Perez has been showing up in qualifying, but some of the results that Stroll has had has been really impressive. Of course, Perez is still ahead of him in the championship, as we would expect. But, I think Perez will show up probably at Canada, and I think Perez will be pretty close to the final point, but I don't think that Racing Point will be close enough. They ultimately just don't have the car that is good enough to score points compared to, say, teams like McLaren, Renault. They're just not at that level, honestly. So I don't think they'll score any points really at the Paul Ricard circuit. And I've said this on numerous times so far this season. Lance Stroll, if he improves his qualifying, he can get even better results than what he has already so far this season.
Absolutely, and it is enormously frustrating with the guy, because you can see when it comes to the race pace, not only with the race starts, but his race pace is actually really good. But again, as you say, when it comes to qualifying, the guy cannot put in a good lap. I think the last time he got out of Q1 was Suzuka 2018, I think. Maybe it was Monza 2018, but I think it was one of those two races. He has to improve his qualifying. If he can start to out-qualify Sergio Perez, Stroll could be a consistent points scorer for Racing Point. He really could. But if he continues to finish in qualifying in P16, 17, 18, then yeah, if he scores points, great. But he can't do it every single time. He has to improve that area of himself. And also, Racing Point would have a decent opportunity of finishing P5 or even P4 in the Constructors if Stroll could actually qualify well. Because if Stroll was, say, right there with Sergio Perez this season in terms of qualifying, Racing Point would probably be right there with McLaren and Renault. But they're not. They're still in a good position in P6, but because of Stroll's lack of qualifying pace, you cannot doubt it can be better than it is so far. And then finally, of course, is Williams, who are going to be at the very back. But let's now get into, and I want you guys in the live chat and the comments section as well to give your thoughts as to this. What is your prediction for the French Grand Prix for the podium positions and also the top 3 in qualifying? Let us know in the live chat and the comments, and we'll read out some in the next few minutes. But we'll get into ours first. So for me, in qualifying, I'm going to go for Lewis Hamilton on pole, Valtteri Bottas second, and in third, I'm going to go for Charles Leclerc, because I think Leclerc, as you said earlier, Nib, he's actually very good at this track. He was very, very good in the Sauber last year. So I think Leclerc will be third, and then it'll probably be Vettel fourth, Verstappen fifth, and it should be Pierre Gasly in P6. And then on race day, I think it'll be Hamilton winning from Bottas second. And in third, I am going to go for... I'm going to go for Charles Leclerc, but it's going to be very close, honestly. It is going to be very close. I think, honestly, Leclerc, Vettel and Verstappen are going to be in a race-long battle for third. I think it's going to be that close. Hopefully, it's a race-long battle for the top 5. Hamilton, Bottas, Leclerc, Vettel and Verstappen. Hopefully, they're all racing each other, but I think it'll be a 3-way battle for third place. But I think Leclerc, because he'll qualify third, will just about take that position. Nib, for the French Grand Prix, what are you going for? Top 3, qualifying and race?
Well, you certainly took your time, like I do during the race watch along. I have the whole entire start of the watch along to sort of figure out, and then like literally about 2 minutes before you throw to me, I just come up with my predictions on the spot. But for the French Grand Prix, I think Lewis Hamilton is going to take pole position. Lewis, he's just been bang average so far this season, and he's leading the championship by more than a race now. That's how good Lewis Hamilton is. And I honestly think he's just going to get better and better throughout the rest of the season. So on pole, I think it's going to be Lewis Hamilton. Pardon me. In second, I think it's going to be Charles Leclerc. We've seen last year I think he qualified. He certainly got through to Q3.
I think he was P8.
He's P8, yes. He qualified ahead of both Haas's last year at the French Grand Prix. So I think he's probably going to get second. And then in third, I'm not even going to say Valtteri Bottas. I think it's going to be Sebastian Vettel in third. But that's purely because I think it's going to be super, super close. I think it's going to be at least from Hamilton to, say, Bottas is going to be about 2 to 1.5 tenths. I think it's going to be super, super close between Ferrari and Mercedes next weekend at Paul Ricard. So I say that Leclerc's going to qualify second. Vettel's going to qualify third, but I really don't know. I think Hamilton will get pole, but then it could be anyone in second or third or fourth. I think it could be anyone of Bottas, Vettel, and Leclerc. But I might just say Vettel has really been superior over Leclerc so far this season. I think people have missed this a little bit, caught up in the hype train. Trust me, I am a massive Charles Leclerc fan. Don't get me wrong about that. But Vettel, has dominated him in qualifying and both in race results. And I think people need to look at that more, honestly. Charles, of course, he's still very young. It's his first season in Ferrari, but he's not better than Vettel at the moment. He's not. I think because of how good he is at France, at Paul Ricard, that he will qualify ahead of Vettel. But, it's not like he's going to absolutely trounce Vettel. That's for sure, So I think in qualifying, it will be Hamilton first, Leclerc second, Vettel third. But then in the race, I think it'll be Hamilton first, Bottas second. Yes, I think Bottas will come through the midfield. Oh, wow, that's an insult. I think Bottas will come through the midfield. Bottas will... Wow, I'm disgraceful. Bottas will come through both the Ferraris. And then I think it'll be probably Sebastian Vettel who finishes in third place. I just don't think that the Ferraris in race trim are quite as quick as the Mercedes at the moment. And, you know, I think France with the long straights in qualifying, they'll be very good. That's why I say they'll be second and third. But in the race, I think Bottas will claw back that gap. Hamilton will win the race comfortably. And I think it'll be a comfortable 1-2. You know, it'll be a comfortable 1-2 once again for Mercedes.
I will say, and I will agree actually, and I think people need to stop with the Leclerc hype, because as you said, he hasn't actually been as great as people have been making out, or as great as people were hoping for this season. Australia, he was poor. Bahrain, great. China, he was decent, nothing special. Baku, his pace was great, but he made that critical mistake. Spain, kind of like Shanghai, he was decent. He made mistakes, but he also, you know, had good pace at times. Monaco, I don't think he could really be blamed for that, but then again, he made the, you know, mistake in crashing into Hulkenberg / the wall. And then in Canada, he just wasn't quick enough. Leclerc honestly should have been winning. I think Leclerc should have been winning the Canadian Grand Prix, honestly, because he was in a quick enough car, and also, you know, he should have been, definitely by the time we got to the pit stops, he should have been within 3 or 4 seconds of his teammate Vettel, but he just really wasn't. He didn't really have that great speed in Canada. And I think Leclerc has been quite inconsistent this season, which is basically the hallmark of a young driver. Young drivers are very inconsistent, and I think Leclerc has been this season. But I will say that if there was no chicane on that straight, I guarantee you Ferrari would be on pole. Guarantee you they'd be on pole. But because there is that chicane, that's really what I think hampers Ferrari's advantage in the straights. Ferrari will be very quick in that middle sector, there's no doubt about that. But if there was no chicane there, like there used to be in the past, Ferrari would probably get on pole by a tenth or two, because that straight, if there was no chicane, and honestly there should be a chicane. I understand they don't want the drivers going in there at, you know, 200 odd miles an hour into that right-hander in case, you know, you get a puncture, but they did it in the past and nothing happened. So I think they should honestly get rid of that chicane, and I think it would make things honestly more interesting at this Grand Prix. Hopefully in the future they do that. But now we're going to come to you guys in the live chat and see what you guys think in terms of who's going to win, get pole position and stuff like that. Again, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Also, don't forget to subscribe for the 2019 French Grand Prix weekend content coming up next weekend. Of course, practice 2 watch along at 1:30 p.m. UK time. We'll be going live. We'll be going live at 1 p.m. on Saturday. 1 p.m. UK time on Saturday. And then, of course, the qualifying review will come out soon after qualifying finishes. And then we'll be live for the race watch along at 1:10 UK time on the Sunday. So don't forget to come along to that next weekend. And also, don't forget to hit this video with a like. But now, let me get into reading some... Actually, let me just check. Have I got any super chats? No, I haven't. Right, let me just quickly read out some predictions from you guys. Right, Will F1 says Hamilton first, Bottas second, Vettel third in qualifying and the race. Sebastian says for qualifying, Hamilton, Leclerc, Bottas. And then for the race, Hamilton, Bottas, Leclerc. Lisa Dubs, I think, is very, very optimistic, saying for qualifying, Lewis on pole, Gasly second, Leclerc third. And then in the race, Lewis first, Max second, Seb third. Spider Monkey says Hamilton, Vettel, Verstappen, Leclerc, Bottas, and then Ricciardo, Gasly, Hulkenberg, Sainz and Kvyat. Right, let's find some more comments if I can. Super Vlogger Michael says Vettel to win and get redemption. It would be great to see Ferrari get that, but I don't think this track is the type of track that they will get it at. I think, though, once we get to Austria, which, by the way, if you don't know, is directly a week after, I think once we get to Austria, Ferrari are definitely the favourites for Austria because, as Kimi Raikkonen famously coined a year ago, half the track is DRS. So I think Ferrari will be very, very strong at the Red Bull Ring. Racing says Lewis, Max, Seb, Bottas, Leclerc, Ricciardo, Gasly. Right, let me find. Thomas Hill says, you say nothing happened at that corner in the past, but a guy died there during testing. Well, sorry if I've made a mistake there, but I don't, have a great knowledge of Paul Ricard. It's not, a track that I have a massive knowledge about. So if that did happen, then sorry about that. But also you have to remember, well, tell me, what year it was also of that accident. But I'm pretty sure if that did happen, it probably happened back in the day where I think at that corner, the runoff was grass and gravel and fencing. Back in the late 80s at Paul Ricard. So, and if you look at the runoff now, it's so big that I don't think it would be that dangerous, honestly. Right, let me find a couple more comments. Super Vlogger Michael continued his prediction by saying Vettel first, Hamilton second, Leclerc third. And also for qualifying, he says Vettel on pole, Bottas second, Leclerc third. So he's going for Hamilton outside the top three. That's a bit of a wild prediction, but you never know. Let me see if I can find any more, and we'll read out Will F1's the rest of his prediction after his top three, where he says Verstappen fourth, Leclerc fifth, Gasly sixth, and then the top of the midfield will be Ricciardo and Hülkenberg, followed by Sainz and Albon. But I think we've read out there all of the predictions. But guys, what we normally do, of course, when we do a live podcast is we go straight into a Q&A, which, by the way, we are going to do. Don't worry, we will get into a Q&A in a moment. But I have something else that we are going to get into that is definitely of interest, and I think me and Nib are going to have some fun with. So, let's get into the tweets by Rich Energy, because they have been absolutely on fire in the last week. By the way, the first couple screenshots are from Nib, I believe, because they deleted these first two tweets, and then the other ones are from me. By the way, I could have screenshotted about 100. There are so many comments from them which you can screenshot and put up on a video. So now let's get into it. So this is the first tweet that they deleted. This was right after qualifying too. So they tweeted at Kevin Magnussen, pushing the limits, hits the wall and knocks out at Max Verstappen. Oh dear. At Red Bull Racing. And then the hashtags, honestly the best bit. Hashtag Denmark. Hashtag Elite Performance. That's not very elite, crashing into a wall. Hashtag Viking, hashtag Warrior, hashtag F1, hashtag Rich Energy, and hashtag Better Than Red Bull. And I'll get onto that Better Than Red Bull in just a moment, but then they tweeted this. At Red Bull Racing, get on your bike. At Max Verstappen should drink the world's premium energy drink at Rich Energy, and he would be a bit happier. And then put the hashtags are then hashtag gives you horns, hashtag Rich Energy, hashtag Better Than Red Bull, hashtag F1, and then Canadian Grand Prix, Kevin Magnussen, Viking, and Warrior. By the way, though, this is what makes me so just... They have to be trolling, because, they've put it in two tweets there, Better Than Red Bull. You were out-qualified by a Red Bull. You were out-qualified still by Pierre Gasly, so how are you better than Red Bull? And by the way, you still started behind both of the Red Bulls, even though Magnussen's crash knocked him out. How are you saying you're better than Red Bull when the first Red Bull ended up miles ahead of the other one? That makes absolutely no sense. Honestly, such idiots. Such idiots. But there you go. They're the first two. Now let's get into a couple more. So let's get into this one where Rich Energy, and by the way, this quoted tweet we'll get into in a moment, they responded to someone who was a bit critical of them. So Chris Harris, who is, I believe, does Chris Harris present Top Gear still? I don't know if he does, right. I knew he did a couple years ago, but I wasn't sure if he still did. So he's a Top Gear presenter. And he's quote tweeting this tweet, which we'll get onto in a moment. Absolutely wonderful tweet there. He puts, at ChazzaHDF1 team, you might want to disassociate yourself from this bunch. And then this is how Rich Energy's Twitter respond. You do low rent videos in your bio. I don't get what this company's on about. Analysis on a similar level in the way your show does not support UK car companies like at Ultima Cars. By the way, I've never heard of Ultima. Never heard of Ultima. And then puts in brackets, faster than Porsche that you fawn over. It is entirely in keeping that you would disparage us. And then puts hashtag fact check, hashtag Top Gear, hashtag Ultima. Like,
where's the fake news?
Exactly.
Hashtag fake news.
Exactly. They should have put hashtag fake news. But like, this is what I mean. Any type of criticism they get, they respond. By the way, guys, after the stream finishes, go to their Twitter and go on tweets and replies and look down the list of replies they've, had with other people. It is honestly hilarious. They are so, low rent. Of course, they know what low rent is, considering they are the living embodiment right now of low rent with the way their Twitter is and how they model themselves on Twitter. But like any type of criticism they get, they do this. And it was completely uncalled for. Chris Harris didn't even at them on Twitter or directly respond to them. I know on Twitter, if you quote tweet someone, the person you've quoted gets the notification, but he was responding or kind of, talking more to Haas than you. What is the point in doing that? Again, any type of criticism, they do this. And it's honestly such unprofessional behavior. Then the quote tweet, the original tweet that Chris Harris responded to. Now, they were replying Rich Energy to @White Bikes. White Bikes is a company that they're currently having a legal dispute with. Where we're not going to comment on it because, of course, it's not our right to. And they are currently having a legal battle over the logo at the moment. White Bikes, I can't remember the exact tweet, but I think it was a tweet that was kind of slightly teasing Rich Energy, trying to get them, I think, to respond. And of course, they did respond, saying, enjoy the free PR while you can, guys. Those with an IQ higher than their age realize you are Mickey Mouse. Oh, how we will laugh in due course. We are actually investing money in F1 while you are investing zero. Total parasites who knew about us for about 2 years before piping up. What? I'll make this point. Does anyone out there ever see, whenever a big company is in some sort of legal case or lawsuit, the one thing you don't see is that company atting the other, person or company on Twitter, talking to them, because that is not how professionals do things. You don't talk to, people you're currently in a court case with, and you don't respond in such a childish, unprofessional manner. I don't think there is anyone at that company that understands what PR is. I don't think they understand at all. I could run PR for their company because I understand more than them the basic principles of PR. They don't. Anyone who criticizes them or teases them, they respond like this.
Just look at their replies. I just had a look then, and they just respond like little kids. It's like they're 2 years old. It's actually hilarious.
It is. I wouldn't be surprised if William Story is actually running the account. I wouldn't be surprised if that
Allegedly.
allegedly, yes, allegedly. But it's unbelievable, honestly, unbelievable. Now, there is one final one I want to get onto, and by the way, I'll come to you guys with a question in just a moment because I wanna know what you guys think about something in a moment. But here's another one. So Vega, you can see at the top there, they were responding to a tweet that Rich Energy did about selling drinks in, I think it was Walmart, which I know is a store in America. It's most popular in America, the least I know. Vega responded saying, I'm a bit confused. How can it be the UK's premium energy drink when it's not widely available in the UK? Also, is your Taste the Difference tagline mean you're aligned with Sainsbury's own brand? If you're in the UK, by the way, and you know what Sainsbury's is, you'll know that Taste the Difference is, their tagline. And then Rich Energy respond saying, it is widely available, very popular, so maybe sold out where you are looking. Absolute rubbish. Absolute rubbish. That is not sold out where you're looking. And I can guarantee you, if I went and looked after this stream finished, if I went to a few stores to the town near me to see if there was any drinks of theirs, guarantee I wouldn't find any. And if I asked the staff, they probably wouldn't even know what they are. So, absolute rubbish. And then, is there any more on this bit? Let me see if I scroll down. And then look, person there, was it Matthias, Mega F1 fan, loves loud B10s, putting in quotations widely. Yes, indeed. But I just want to ask you guys, would you like to see me do a video about Rich Energy and kind of looking at, you know, them as a company and their whole drinks thing, but also looking at how they are when it comes to Twitter and kind of doing a kind of a bio on them, but also kind of a bit of an investigative type of video? Would you guys like to see that? Let me know in the chat or the comments, and I will get, you know, researching for that video, because I am absolutely for making that video. I just want to see if anyone out there is interested. I know there was one person in our Discord that was asking about the possibility of that, so there's one person there that is interested. So yeah, guys in the chat right now, are you interested in a video on this certain company, or would you rather me I don't know, maybe cover it in streams or something like that? Let me know in the live chat. We'll now go on to the Q&A, but Nib, what's your thoughts about those tweets? Those are so unprofessional. Again, I know that, look, there's a difference between banter and being unprofessional. There's plenty of companies who will be very funny and very cheeky with how they run their Twitter. Like, for example, in the UK, I think Pizza Hut, on their UK Twitter, they were teasing Leeds United Football Club about their lack of success. That's banter. That's friendly internet banter. But what they're doing is, it's not banter. It's literally them just criticising anyone who dares criticise them and acting so unprofessional for what is, at the end of the day, a company and a main title sponsor for an F1 team. What do you think about it, Nib?
Well, I think you know that I find it quite hilarious. I'll just read you a little thread from just a couple of hours ago from Rich Energy. So they tweeted supporting motorsport at 3 events this weekend. Premium British performance with at Rich Energy, hashtag Le Mans, hashtag BSB, hashtag Hill Climb, hashtag Rich Energy, hashtag gives you horns.
Oh.
And then someone responded saying, give you horns? Really? You've had a legal case over the logo. Are you goading at Red Bull UK to sue you for your slogan too? And then they responded, we already won legal argument on horns. We just need our trademarks respected now, referring to Stag. Thanks for interest. Then someone responded, strange. My understanding and everybody else was that you lost against White and we were laughed out of court by the judge. Then they
Oh dear.
responded, far from everybody else, prudent to wait the next stage of legal proceedings. Thanks for the interest. Regards, at Rich Energy. And then the dude responded, 12 days and counting. Isn't it when the court decide your fate? No, enjoy the way. Fake news. At Rich Energy, not incapacitated in the slightest by ongoing proceedings, which we are very confident of winning. Very best. And then once again, he responded, I'm sure the next episode of court proceedings will be just as interesting, read, as the last one. Not sure white bikes are concerned about your deluded thoughts of winning the case. Then they responded, they should be, but you are probably right. They think they have already run. Great news. Cheers. This is somehow a proper company who sells energy drinks, and they respond to trolls on Twitter. Imagine that. If Chaz responded to every single troll or person that was negative against him in the last week, he'd still be ongoing today. It's just absolutely ridiculous. And then the dude responded, I believe it was the judge that decided white bikes had won. In my experience, they tend to have the final say in these cases. Oh, no, fair point. He's like, perhaps you wish. This is Rich Energy, by the way. Perhaps you wish to read up on judicial appeals, miscarriages of justice, and legal precedent, not to mention IP law basics. However, we'll be guided by our legal team and not comment further until after case. Appreciate your interest and look forward to the volatile fan. Thanks. They're actually a meme. Rich Energy are a meme. To be fair, right, I've actually had their drink, and it's pretty good, right? But like on a video of the incident analysis, you had 538 comments, right? And they are a company that makes money from people actually buying their energy drink, and they respond to people who tweet them. Imagine that. Imagine that. They're crying out loud.
I know.
It's ridiculous. The state of their company. They're just the meme. You know, that's why Chaz brought them up, because they're just the meme.
Yeah, well, I literally brought them up because I wanted to have a laugh about their tweets. But as you pointed out, with like, you know, I've had so many comments on my videos this week because of obviously the Vettel Hamilton video. I think
go check it out.
Yeah, absolutely check it out. But if you haven't seen, there are over now 600 comments. They're not all other people. There's plenty of mine there, but there's probably 450 at least that are from different people. I haven't responded to everyone's comments because I don't have the time to. I only respond to people's comments regularly, say within the first 3 to 4 hours, maybe longer depending on what I'm doing. But you know what I mean? I'm not a professional company. I'm just a guy sat in his house making videos. I'm not a professional company. They're a professional company that is the title sponsor of an F1 team, and they're acting more childish than I could possibly even imagine myself to be doing. And also, their comments really come off as like YouTube comment section type of, you know what I mean? It's so childish.
Your opinion is wrong. Please improve your comment opinion.
It's so childish. I guarantee the person running that Twitter is not trained when it comes to PR. No way they are. No chance in hell.
Oh, Chaz, I do a journalism degree at uni right now. And trust me, they are not trained in PR.
Yeah, no way. There is no chance, because even companies that are way too robotic when it comes to PR, at least they would, you know, respect all the boundaries when it comes to that.
They're professional.
Yeah, exactly. But they respond to people like a child. They cannot take criticism at all. I guarantee if I made a video on them, they'd probably at me on Twitter for making a video on them. And then, you know, make, you know, silly comments. They're basically in terms of their Twitter, they're very Donald Trump-like in terms of their Twitter account. Very, very similar in terms of just
fake news.
Yeah, it's very similar. I don't like it, but I think now we'll move on. But guys, again, let me know. Do you want a video on? Do you want a video when it comes to that, to Rich Energy? Because I'm willing to make it, and I am absolutely willing to doing research into their drinks. And also doing research when it comes to their tweets and how they respond on Twitter and how they act as a company. I'm absolutely willing to do that video. So let me know if you want it, and I will. I won't upload it, straight away, because it will take a quite a bit of research, and it probably won't be uploaded until, say, autumn time. But I'm willing to do that video. So let me know if you want to see that. Right. Thomas Hill says, yes, video please on disastrous company. Right, let me find some questions or some comments. But yeah, Q&A time, guys, so make sure to put your questions in the chat, and then we'll read out some and answer some before we come to the end of the stream. Right, first one, Simon Troop, and I can answer this. Are you having the Austrian Grand Prix preview a week on Tuesday? This is the thing. Because France and Austria, it's the first back-to-back of 2019. Me and Nib are probably going to talk about what we're going to do, but it's most likely going to be a recorded preview, because I like to keep the live podcast for a Saturday. And if it's, on a different day, or we can't do it live on a Saturday, then we do it recorded. So it's most likely going to be recorded, and it will come out directly, I think, in between the French and Austrian Grand Prix, probably on the Wednesday, say, something like that. We'll get that preview out for you guys. And then obviously the week after Austria, we'll be able to do it live again. The weekend in between Austria and Silverstone. So yeah, there will be a preview for sure in between France and Austria. It probably won't be Tuesday, but it'll most likely be Wednesday. So I can have enough time to, record the podcast and get it up for Wednesday after, of course, I do the incident analysis for the French Grand Prix on the Monday. Right, let's find some more questions here. Let me just find. I'm trying to look. Simon Troop, is it going to rain in France for the Grand Prix next weekend? I haven't actually checked the weather, but most likely no, because, well, it's the south of France at the end of June. The chances of rain are very small because of that. Very, very hot time of year.
And I know last year at the Grand Prix there were so many issues with parking. Hopefully there aren't similar issues compared to last year, because I know so many fans were struggling with that last year.
Yeah, they were. Eric Boulier, I think, who is a promoter, one of the people promoting the Grand Prix or helping out with the Grand Prix. I think he came out and said that it should be fixed for this season. Hopefully it is, because it was a shame that happened. So we'll see if that is fixed. But yeah, if you are going to the Grand Prix, don't absolutely bet on it being better than last year, because you never know. It could be just as bad, if not worse. You never know. NN says, I think you should do it, but include an energy drink tasting session and an IRL cam, including at least 5 drinks. I will say, I don't actually like energy drinks. I could probably drink one, but I'm not the type of person that could, get into drinking energy drinks. I'm not that type of person. I could probably drink one if I had to, and definitely I would be willing to drink their drink just for the research purposes. Let's just leave it at that.
Main purposes, you mean?
Yeah. By the way, can I ask, when it comes to when you had a can of their drink, where was it sold? Was it sold like next to or near the track, or was it just completely random store?
They like posted a whole list of like stores that they were selling it in Melbourne. And it's like a trendy convenience store. So like convenience store usually being like 7-Eleven, but it was like some sort of it was like some sort of fancy convenience store that I got it, and I got two of them. I remember I sent it in the Discord for all you people that were in the Discord at that time, and I straight up said that it was probably pretty good. But yeah, I'm sure if you can somehow get your hands on it, I'm sure a tasting session would be quite hilarious.
Yeah, it probably would. But I am gonna, again, allegedly, but I think you only found one because it was Grand Prix weekend. You know what I mean?
It wasn't Grand Prix weekend.
Was it not?
It was about 3 weeks after.
Oh, was it 3 weeks after? Okay. I was going to say, if it was on the Grand Prix weekend, then I think that's probably why you found one. But right, okay. So there you go. I'm sure there's stores out there that sell it, but I guarantee if I went into the town next to me, which has plenty of stores, guarantee I wouldn't find one. But I'll definitely.
It's very limited.
Yeah, very, very limited. Or as they would put, it's sold out everywhere. Right, let me find some more. Just find some more comments. Simon Troop again. Who do you think will win the F2 championship? I'm going for Nicholas Latifi because I think he's probably the most consistent driver in the field. I think everyone else is not really consistent enough. So yeah, I'll go Nicholas Latifi for that. Nib, who are you going for?
I'm going to go for Sergey Seta Camera.
I will say, I kind of hope Sete Camera does well enough because I do want to see a Brazilian driver back in F1 because I think, honestly, it's a shame that we don't have Brazilian drivers in F1. They've been such a massive part of the sport ever since, Emerson Fittipaldi. So I'm hoping we can get a Brazilian back on the grid. So it'd be great to see him, you know, possibly winning that championship and maybe can get a seat. By the way, thank you for watching, Annette. Right, let me find a couple more comments. Thomas Hill asking about the chicane. Do you think they'll remove it for 2020 if drivers complain again? They should remove it. I think they should. Because, again, going into that fast right-hander, there is plenty of runoff. So, even if they did fly off the track, the car would lose a lot of it would lose a lot of energy by the time it got to the barrier. So I don't think it would be that dangerous, to be honest, because again the runoff area is massive at that corner. So I think they should honestly just make it one continuous straight like it used to be back in the good old days.
It was good for overtaking last year. I'm not against the chicane.
The chicane, I will admit the chicane, it does present a good opportunity for outbraking maneuvers, but I think if we had that chicane cut out, we would have a Baku type situation where you'd be able to slipstream from miles back and then get, you know, a move done by the end of the straight or possibly after the right-hander going into that other fast right-hander. So I think if you got rid of the chicane and the racing wasn't really that much improved, then yeah, probably should keep the chicane. But I think we would honestly see a massive improvement in the racing, even though it wasn't too bad last year. And let me see if I can find any final questions. Sebastian talking about where Ferrari are going to be great, saying Monza. Austria, also Austria and Silverstone. Those two tracks are really going to be good for Ferrari. Hopefully, they don't, get unlucky, or they do actually show the speed that they should be, showing at those tracks. Also, Hockenheim, I think they'll be strong there. Spa, not so much. I think the middle sector will kind of negate that. But yeah, There will be tracks for Ferrari where they can definitely win, but because it's Ferrari, I have severe doubts when it comes to that, because Ferrari tend to... I mean, how many times have Ferrari, since 2017, not won at tracks where they were supposed to, based on how the race was going, or going into the weekend based on how the track is for their car? How many races have they not won that they should have won? There's so many. So with Ferrari, I honestly feel as though their first win, if they do get it this season, it's probably going to happen at a track where we're not expecting it. Maybe France, maybe Suzuka, Russia, you never know. That's the way Ferrari are. Right, let me find if there's any more comments or questions. Just trying to find... I'll find one final one, then we'll come to the end of the stream, because I think we have been on long enough. Hour and 45 minutes now. Right, let me find... Tonka Toy Truck, has Rich Energy come up with a new logo? Not yet. I don't think so. Don't think they have. Right, let me try and find... I can't find a final comment to end on. Nib, if you can find one, then make sure to shout one out. Right, I'll end on this comment from Eugene Kelly, who says, Chazza, you see Horner crying about the tyres, saying they should go back to last year's tyres because he thinks Mercedes had the new ones figured out. Sounds like sour grapes to me. I will say, I think the teams that are complaining honestly need to stop and actually start to learn the tyres, because they've had plenty of time to. They had 8 days of dry testing, and they've had, what, every single session basically this season's been in the dry. So they've had plenty of time to learn the tyres. I don't think they have many excuses. And by the way, I think Red Bull and Ferrari... just admit that you want them changed because you'll be better on them, instead of, oh, we don't think this is great for the sport in terms of entertainment. Just be honest, you think you're going to be better on those, on, say, last year's tyres. That's the reason why they want them changed, but they won't admit that because, well, they'll be giving the game away, but there you go. But, yeah, that is now, guys, the end of today's podcast, episode 39, previewing the 2019 French Grand Prix. Thank you guys for coming along. And also, again, don't forget to subscribe for more podcast episodes like this. Bottom right of the screen, you can do it right there. Or go to my homepage and subscribe. And also, don't forget to hit the notifications bell for more content like this. And also, smash the like if you want more videos like this. Nib, thanks for coming along. I knew you couldn't make 3 PM, so it's great that you can make 5 PM and we could, you know, have this, what has been a fun stream.
Of course, you know, I can't make 12 AM for me, but I could make 2 AM for me. Of course, it's just about to go 4 AM for me. So, you know, my silly sleeping pattern as per usual. But no, always great to be along for the podcast, and great to see the usuals and some new people in the chat for the stream. You know, thank you to people like Thomas, Sayugara, Annette, who are always in the stream supporting us. So just a massive thank you to you usual guys and girls who support us, and I will certainly be on stream next, pretty basically in about a week's time for the French Grand Prix, which I'm certainly looking forward to, because I think it'll be really close between Ferrari and Mercedes, and I think Renault will be even pushing Red Bull next weekend at the French Grand Prix. But we will see, of course, how that develops through practice. And I'm you know, qualifying got me really hyped for Canada, and I'm hoping that the qualifying for the French Grand Prix does once again. But once again, thank you once again for having me on the podcast. As per usual, podcast 39, 40th podcast will be the next one, which has been mad. You know, we only started in the mid-season break of Spa last year, and to be racking up 40 on the next one is a bit mad. So thank you to everyone, and of course, thank you to you, Chazza, because without you, of course, this wouldn't be possible. And big thanks to everyone for us hitting 5,000 subscribers.
Absolutely.
during the week. You know, I was up and awake. Chaz was asleep when we hit 5,000 subscribers, but it it certainly brought a big smile to my face. You know, and the support that we've received on the channel lately has been superb. So just once again, massive thank you to everyone, and I will see you next time when I'm on stream for the race watch along for the French Grand Prix.
Absolutely, and thank you, Nib, for coming on. And also, I echo what he said. Thank you guys for 5,000 subs. Also, thank you for the support as of late. I know there's plenty of people out there that disagreed with me when it comes to my opinions, but at the end of the day, it's an opinions channel, and I'm sure most of us, sensible people, can just agree to disagree and go on about our ways. But yeah, thank you guys for 5,000 subs, and good news, we're not too far away. If we continue to grow the way we are, we're not too far away from 10,000, which of course is the end of year target. Currently on Social Blade it says we're going to hit 10k very soon, so hopefully that does happen. But yeah, thank you guys for the support, really do appreciate it. Hopefully the amount of people that joined us last weekend in Canada can join us again next weekend in France, and for the weekend after in Austria. But guys, also don't forget to join my Discord server, link below in the description. That's the best place for notifications of my videos and live streams, and also it's the hardcore ChazzaHDF1 community. Also don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Chaz6110, and check out my website ChazzaHD.com for more content like this. But I just want to let you guys know one last thing. The content coming up between now and practice 2 for the French Grand Prix. My next video will be on Tuesday, where I'll be looking at the current F1 rumours, and it will be a preluding video to a follow-up video that will come out just before Silverstone, where I will do my driver lineup predictions for 2020. So don't forget to come along to the video on Tuesday, where I will look at the rumours going into that video, that follow-up video, which will come out, 2 weeks later. And also, there will be a video on Thursday. Now, I did say on Monday or Sunday that it was going to be a video about the current engines in Formula 1 and who's currently ahead and who's doing well. It might still be that, but I'm thinking about possibly doing another video. But that doesn't mean that engine video won't happen. Even if I do, not do it on Thursday, it will still happen, but it just won't happen on Thursday. I'm thinking of possible other videos, which I'm sure you guys will be interested in. But guys, that's been us today, and until next time, it has been me, ChazzaHD. Goodbye.